Hello, everyone. My name is Varuja Mehdi. I'm Head of Engagement here at Justice Connect. Before I begin, as always, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which I'm dialing in from, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded, which means that the land I'm calling from always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've really had an excellent time listening to the previous sessions. It's wonderful to see years and years of work that you've been a part of just presented so clearly. So thank you to everyone that's presented, including the University of Melbourne, as well as the team from the innovation team. I'll later be joined by Samantha Sauerwein, who's the Head of Community Programs and Manager of Advocacy and Projects. She will be talking about Dear Landlord. I saw a message in our earlier session with someone asking if they could get a bit of a demo of how Dear Landlord works. You can definitely go on apps.justiceconnect.org.au/Dear Landlord and have a go of it yourself. I think seeing the different pathways that you can take using the self-help tool for Victorian renters is definitely the best way to experience it. But if you need a more kind of extensive resource, we'll also be showing our promotional video, which goes some way in representing how it works and how it interacts. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about self-help and consumer outreach in an increasingly digital world. As Kate presented early on at 12:30, we've been working on our innovation strategy since 2016, but we've been kind of increasing that capacity and improving the visibility of our tools, services, and resources by making sure that the people who need those resources, those tools, those services actually know that they exist. And we do that by extensive consumer outreach. But we don't do any of our work in isolation. We're always kind of working and presenting the different projects in tandem. So all the things that we do inform each other. The alternate title to this presentation is We Can't Just Build Something and Expect People to Come. Like we all know, we get really, there are many kind of digital projects out there where the developers get really excited, push it out there, but without any extensive connection to the communities that they are trying to engage with, it often can be a flop. But our kind of ethos in the way that we build things and we do outreach is we can't just build something and let it sit there and not continue to iterate and improve it. So today I'm going to be talking to you about our digital consumer outreach program in response to COVID, which gave us a kind of wonderful test case for doing extensive outreach and making sure that our tools and resources are out there. The research that we've conducted on how people, sorry, I'm just getting some technical issues, which I'm not quite sure about, but I will, there we go. Hopefully that has resolved it. And I will go back to the previous page. So we also conducted research on how people seek legal help online, in particular people who are often deemed less capable or have less capacity to self-help by either frontline organizations or service delivery organizations. And then I'll talk about using digital strategies to scale our impact, whether it's self-help resources, our online legal clinic, Justice Connect Dancers, or our non-for-profit law website that just got relaunched and redesigned. It looks absolutely incredible. And then we'll go into a bit of a deep dive with the support of my colleague, Samantha Sauerwein, and Samantha Sauerwein, and talk about launching and relaunching Dear Landlord. I say relaunching because, as Kate explained in the previous session, we take a kind of very strong support of an MVP approach to pushing out tools, making sure that they're being used in the real life context, and iterating and constantly improving. And so Dear Landlord has actually gone through 3 iterations, but Sam will go into that and how that development worked. So on your screen right now, you've got a little bit of an oversight of all the kind of digital interventions that we've developed, whether it's our intake and referrer tools that you can access straight on our homepage, our online legal clinic, Justice Connect Answers, our range of self-help resources that are optimized to be found and accessible through search, through Google or Bing or any other kind of search interface that you use, as well as Dear Landlord on the top right there. If you kind of press play there, it kind of goes through a bit of a demo of what Dear Landlord looks like, which somewhat answers the question that we had earlier. So as I explained, COVID-19 gave us a bit of a great use, a bit of a test case, because suddenly we had compounding crises that meant face-to-face service delivery was either impossible or incredibly difficult. It was also made even more inaccessible by people who have traditionally always had accessibility issues, whether it's because it's geography, living in a regional or remote area, or because of their accessibility needs. So we had this kind of compounding crisis in 2019-2020, the initial bushfires across the eastern coast, the outbreak of COVID-19 restrictions over various different jurisdictions and hard lockdowns, and also the impending kind of recessions, increasing unemployment, and further cuts to the social safety net. So there's increasing legal need and a decreasing capacity for face-to-face service delivery. So in kind of this kind of moment of crisis, we were able to harness the digital infrastructure that we had been investing in for several years. We were able to harness it to great effect. So we ran a broad range of digital consumer outreach activities, first in response to COVID-19 and the bushfires, but then also responding to new policy developments. And we saw consistently increasing engagement with our resources across our website and our services. You can see this kind of increase over the key financial years as the crises rolled out. So we developed a pilot program of our digital consumer outreach program. It's a cross-org program that invites anyone that is pushing out or launching a Justice Connect legal service, self-help resource or tool to communicate and engage with the engagement and innovation team to use best practice models for digital engagement. So the four kind of key purpose for the digital consumer outreach program was to increase public visibility of our tools, reach those target audiences, especially people who are a priority community, deliver an adaptive and responsive program. So we didn't want to fall into orthodoxies, which I'll explain later, and also apply consumer research, feedback, and insights. So it's really living our innovative, client-focused values as an organization, using a really responsive and agile approach to running a cross-org program. So super dynamic and using the skills and expertise across the organization. So how we work, I think this is a really key part of the success of the pilot initially in the first year of responding to crises, but also in the forthcoming 2 years. But we use an agile project management approach, focusing on outputs rather than just a sharing and discussion. So really focusing on doing and implementing things. We took an iterative approach that is super client focused and innovative. We had a really open source style of skills and resource sharing. So everything is super transparent. Every document, every data point, we really try to break down the inability or kind of inaccessibility of data, because ultimately data is a reflection of how human beings are interacting with services, how human beings are expressing their needs and their wants. And so we really made sure, myself and all my colleagues across the innovation engagement team, to really break down those silos and make data and information and skills super accessible. And we also also develop all of the programs as we do. As I said, we used an agile project management approach, but we developed our professionals across the organization by actually doing. And it's kind of similar to a 70-20 rule or approach that many people may be familiar with, but 70% of our development was focused on actually doing the work and testing things out and actually not being scared of failing, but actually being really upfront about some things not failing. I'll talk about testing and things like that later on. In the first 12-month pilot, where we were responding to bushfires and COVID-19, we saw huge successes across all our self-help resources, engagement on our social media, increases in click links on our Google ads. We optimize our content in really innovative ways. We didn't just dump information in front of people in their digital ecosystems that they usually kind of moved in. We tried to make it as accessible as possible and make the kind of point in which they engage with us as simple and clearly understood as possible. And if they were interested in finding out more information, they could kind of delve into it further onto our website. So I'm going to take you through the step-by-step process of producing resources in particular and pushing those out in those first 12 months. So the first thing is we wanted to publish resources, but as Kate explained in that first introduction and welcome session, we don't just assume anything or we don't make assumptions about what kind of information people really want. We look at the kind of information that and the richness of the data across either our legal services as well as our analytics data and our traffic data. So we're looking at search terms that people use. We're optimizing our metadata in response to that. We're fine-tuning the language that we use in our self-help resources to improve the engagement with our resources, and improving the traffic and engagement with our resources means we have more people engaging with it, a richer data set, and then we can improve it even more. We're constantly monitoring behaviors and looking at the way that people are using our tools, using heat maps, and also user testing as well. And then we're also responding to our frontline staff who are providing that face-to-face or over the phone legal services to make sure that those self-help resources reflect best practice approaches and actually improve the experience of people experiencing legal problems. So we initially also simultaneously, while running outreach during COVID-19, we also ran a research project seeking legal help online, which we called the Missing Majority Report. I'm going to sneeze in just a moment. No, I'm not. So you can find that at justiceconnect.org.au/MM report, so Missing Majority Report. And that kind of gives you an overview of the extensive research that we did with 15 participants from a wide range of diverse backgrounds. So these are people from regional and remote communities, people who with disabilities, people from low socioeconomic backgrounds, who have only completed a high school certificate, single parents. We really tried to capture people who are in greatest need of legal help, and then also understood the kind of tenacity and the problem solving and the kind of expertise that they would bring to the fore, and how they seek legal help online to really understand their kind of logic pathways and their journey through finding legal help. So we wanted to understand how people search for legal help, what that journey looked like, how different resources can help, how resources can be improved, and how help seekers define legal problem. As explained in our previous session on our artificial intelligence language processor tool, how help seekers define a legal problem is a really complex challenge that we're really tackling on multiple, in a multi-pronged way. This isn't the only research that we've conducted since 2016. We've done a wide range of research and consumer testing on a range of our digital tools, as explained in previous sessions. But this was kind of like one of the key pieces that really now help inform the way that we develop self-help resources, which is like legal information or fact sheets as known in other organizations. What we found out is that through a screening survey and online and in-home posted packs, open-ended interviews and debrief sessions, really kind of like extensive and multi-channel approach to doing this research with our 15 wonderful participants. But we found out, surprisingly, that actually it's not people's aptitude that is the problem. The key barrier to engagement with online resources isn't their aptitude or capability, but rather poorly designed information. And that if we don't have that kind of license as social justice for purpose community organizations to improve the way that we engage digitally and really meet people where they're at, because a lot of people from marginalized backgrounds are some of the biggest innovators in the digital space, especially when people are dealing with physical barriers or are disabled by society because of that those kinds of barriers. Digital spaces, digital resources are incredibly important, and it's really important for organizations to understand that and design information and resources accordingly and pay respect to the tenacity of those communities. So as a result of this research and the feedback that we received, that in-depth feedback that we received from the 15 participants, we came up with 8 design principles. You can download this off our website, justiceconnect.org.au/MM report. But these are the kinds of values or ethos that underpin the way that we develop self-help resources. And as I said, we're not into building something and sitting there and letting it forget. Like all things physical, digital resources and tools can also decay. So it's really good to maintain them and make sure they're meeting best practice standards, because the online space is constantly moving, constantly changing, and it's really important for us to be meeting those high standards. So these are the 8 design principles that inform our resources. I really do want to talk about one of our online spaces, our non-for-profit law website. It is a treasure of 300 plus resources, as well as a wide range of webinars, whether live or on demand, and also allows non-for-profit organizations and community organizations to apply for legal help efficiently and effectively. So our non-for-profit law website actually went through a huge redesign over the last 6 months. It looks absolutely beautiful, but that whole process, as we said, was a transformation from what was a website that was very dense and informative, but difficult to navigate. And through consumer research, through human-centered design approaches that pulled out qualitative and quantitative insights, we were able to define the problem that the website was trying to achieve, which is really making sure that the governance frameworks that community organizations are meeting and the legal obligations that organizations meeting means less resources are being used for tackling those legal problems, and instead organizations are then able to divert those resources to meet their purpose. And then we also developed target personas and customer journeys based on the types of people that would be using that website and the way that they would be using it. So as we said, it's this constant iterative process. It's a responsive process, but in addition to publishing resources, we can also always reflect on how can we improve the kind of platform that they're published on as well. In response to COVID-19, we respond to a wide range of trends. As I said before, we were looking at search term data, the way that people were navigating our website, trends and analysis in the news, new policy updates. We also were looking at the types of questions being asked through our intake and referrer tools, as well as our online legal clinic, Justice Connect Answers. And so in response to all of this information and kind of peak troughs, we produce different types of resources in response to them. So we produce accessing court resources because we saw a spike in people searching information about courts online. we published state and territory emergency powers resources to explain how they worked and their implementation, especially in the first 12 months of the COVID-19 response across different jurisdictions, when people were finding information that was perhaps not credible or a little bit confusing, or perhaps when government weren't publishing those resources and maybe diverting their own resources to other response work. This was a really great intervention to make sure that information was accurate and credible. And we also designed resources on tenancy and COVID-19 in response to a broad range of inquiries that we were receiving. As you can see in the types of questions we got asked during the pilot phase of Justice Connect Answers, housing and homelessness was the key issue, especially in response to the different types of tenancy laws and their anti-eviction laws. While we pushed out a broad range of self-help resources through all these different types of channels, we got a range of feedback from from users. We conducted surveys across people who were using and landing on those pages, and they said that it was useful information. They were grateful for being able to access further support, and that the legal tools like our self-help resource, Dear Landlord, was able to help them search for more supports and services. So after you develop these self-help resources to best practice standards using our 8 design principles, we push it out to organic share. Now, organic share, depending on the different channels that you're using, may not be the most fruitful. Your audiences may be just people who have formally followed your organization, or they may be people who are already connected or are referrers to your organization. But it's really important to use organic share in the most kind of optimized way. So it's important to be there and be present, because oftentimes people are searching for support using the digital channels that they're used to. So they're on Facebook or Instagram or closed communities, community groups or message threads that they are most comfortable with. They often find engaging with institutions kind of a big step in their legal help journey. And so if you meet people in the digital ecosystem they're already at, you build trust. We also, as I mentioned previously, we apply a bite snack meal approach to information sharing. So you don't overload them with heaps of information. You get the key message and you present that in that ecosystem, and you slowly build up to a snack, which might be multiple graphics breaking down a concept, and then what I would call a meal, which is the full self-help resource on your website. We always had actionable and interactive resources. So not just plain information that can just sit there, but really providing them a call to action, prompting them to think about if the challenges that they're facing in their life could be a legal problem. As explained by Kate during an earlier session, oftentimes people don't know that they have a legal problem, and often have to be guided through that whole process. So prompting them with clear call to actions is a really great way to do that. And as we've seen through the recent trends, a lot of people are moving into closed communities rather than open channels. So moving away from their open feed and going into closed communities where there are kind of mutual identity, mutual shared identities or experiences. And so we worked really hard to engage in those closed communities and make sure that our resources were there, and that making sure that people knew that we were available to help them. A few other tips and tricks we used using my kind of campaigner knowledge is using key dates and moments to increase a sense of urgency in using those resources. A lot of time, like someone can see a promotion of a legal resource or a tool or a service, and they go, oh, that's good to know. And then they kind of put it down and not really think about it. But if you give them kind of a deadline or understanding of like what, the time frame that they're working with, it makes them move to action. As I said, breaking down those resources to bite-sized consumable content. And also, even though instructional videos are really high lift, we were able to create really quick, engaging, and informative videos that performed much better. But obviously the algorithm changes all the time. And although right now it really supports video, it might change. So it's really good to constantly be testing that. sort of approach. Then we used targeted marketing. So we had very finite resources, but one of the kind of three things that were really, really important is you need to build audiences based on the demographics most impacted by certain legal issues. Later on, we'll show you how building archetypes for a product like Dear Landlord helped us develop the right type of audiences and targeting, and made sure we were getting that tool in front of the people that were being impacted the most. We built those audiences based on our clinic data and insights, our service delivery data and insights, as well as online data. We used every opportunity to test messages and design in our ads. I'll show you a few examples later in a few moments. And we always optimize the ads depending on the platform. So the way an ad looks and feels and the call to actions that you present on it may be very different depending on the different platform that you use. So really being aware of those things is important. This is an example of how we promoted Justice Connect Dances, our online legal clinic. It is the same kind of, the message, but we sort of shifted it depending if it was a Google search ad, if it was a display ad, if it was a Facebook ad. So this is what I mean by message testing. And this is something that, the campaigners amongst us would be very familiar with. We have really finite resources. Our advertising budgets are not very big. So how do we use it to the best of our capability? And how do we make sure that our outreach is informing the way that we develop and produce self-help resources and tools, and also communicate across our channels and our website? We constantly message test. So the kind of message testing that we would do is like different types of call to actions, if different types of headlines on an ad, the button test, what kind of buttons people are more likely to test on, the different colors that we use. So all this information would then feed back into the way that we develop organic content, the way that we write materials on our tools, and back and forth. And so it's a really symbiotic process. And developing a cross-org program like our digital consumer outreach program was so integral to this, because it meant that we were bringing in different types of expertise, but also not working in silos. And so we were sharing these insights across all of our products, our services, and our tools. This is a perfect example of promoting our non-for-profit law training, which is our social enterprise being run out of our non-for-profit law program. We run webinars for community organizations and public benevolent institutes. And we wanted to know, we knew that emojis really increase engagement. Fun fact, no matter what the topic, people love an emoji on a post. And we wanted to know, what is the optimum amount of emojis? And so we tested that out. And so we now know 5 to 7 emojis perform best. So we make sure that there's 5 to 7 emojis that we put in our ads to ensure that people are actually clicking through to those resources or registering for our webinar. I think it's really important, though, that we don't rely on orthodoxies. So as I said, and bringing in a kind of constantly iterative approach to our consumer outreach is really, really incredibly important, because you don't rely on these orthodoxies, and we don't rely on assumptions. And we also don't rely on the ways that we feel comfortable doing it. It means that we're constantly moving and we're constantly responsive, but also means that we're meeting best practice approaches to consumer outreach. Now I want to hand it over to my colleague, Samantha Sauerwein, who will give you a bit of a case study of Dear Landlord, our self-help tool for Victorian renters facing eviction. I'll hand it over to Sam now.
Thanks so much, Rouge. And who would have known emojis could be so powerful? 5 of them. I want to start by acknowledging, first of all, the country that I'm speaking in, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And so before I dive in to talk a bit more about our Dear Landlord self-help tool, as Rouge has flagged, I guess I just wanted to provide a bit of background on Justice Connect homeless law and really how Dear Landlord came about. For those of you who don't know us, Justice Connect Homeless Law is Victoria's free community legal service for people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And so what we do is we design different services with varying levels of support, really depending on our service users' needs. So our critical model that we've had for 20 years has really been about integrated legal and non-legal support through an outreach model. So really basing ourselves out at homelessness and housing services across Melbourne where we know people need us. But we've also developed digital self-help tools, recognising the need for that increased reach, but also that there is that opportunity around self-help for people who can advocate. So we use those digital outreach strategies to reach more Victorians who need help. And then we also use all of our casework outcomes and data to inform our strategic engagement and advocacy work. So why Dear Landlord? How did it come about? So as you can imagine, through our frontline work, supporting people really at risk of homelessness and experiencing homelessness, we see regularly how many people find themselves on the brink of eviction. So over 18,000 applications are made each year to evict Victorian renters who are falling behind in rent. And we can see that through our daily work. So for instance, during COVID, we saw a huge increase in people falling behind in rent after the eviction moratorium. So a 95% increase in people facing eviction for falling behind in rent, and 70% of those were women. So we knew from that work and what we've seen over time that there really is a need to scale our services and to make sure we're reaching more Victorian renters who are able to self-help and to able to avoid eviction if they're just given the right tools at the right time. So we developed our first app, which has been, as Rouge indicated, a bit of a journey. There's been 3 iterations. So Dear Landlord is our free self-help tool that helps Victorian renters avoid eviction for rent arrears. So what it does effectively is to not only help people understand their rights, but really empowering people to take that early action that helps them resolve rent arrears and to avoid eviction. And there's 3 key ways I wanted to highlight about the way Dear Landlord works, drawing on some of the things Rouge talked about earlier with our self-help resources. Firstly, it's really about providing more than just information to people. It's about providing that actionable education and guidance that helps really kind of address some of the barriers that might prevent people from taking action in the first place and really giving them that confidence to take the next steps. Secondly, Dear Landlord gives people something that they get to walk away with, which is bespoke legal documents that will help enable them to resolve their legal issues as well as avoid eviction. And then finally, a really important piece that links into our integrated legal services model generally is that we connect users with the support they need. So if they need further legal support, we connect them with that. But if they need other kinds of support, such as financial support, we also make sure that we're connecting them with that support that they need to resolve their issues. So to give you a bit of a better sense of it, I think Rouge mentioned at the start that we have designed a short video which gives you a real picture of what Dear Landlord does. So we might play that for you and hopefully the tech works for us.
Yep, so I have backup plan B and C if this doesn't work.
You might miss a rent payment. You have rights and we can help you avoid an eviction. Dear Landlord is an online legal tool that can help guide you through the process, provide information about your rights, identify what actions you need to take, and help you write a letter to your landlord. In Victoria, new rental laws now give you better protections to stay in your home. If your landlord, who is now called a rental provider by law, wants to evict you, they must follow a legal process. First, they must give you a notice to vacate. They can't give you one until you're 14 days or more behind in rent. You don't have to leave by the termination date in the notice. In most cases, if you pay your rent by the termination date, you won't be evicted. If you can't pay what you owe in rent, you can request a payment plan. Dear Landlord can help you draft a letter to do this. If you can't pay or can't agree on a payment plan by the termination date listed on your notice to vacate, your landlord, also known as your rental provider, can apply to VCAT for a possession order and a hearing will be scheduled. At the hearing, you have a right to tell your side of the story. You can ask for an affordable payment plan or to speak to a financial counsellor. If this is the 5th notice that you have received within 12 months, VCAT may not accept a payment plan and you may be at greater risk of eviction. VCAT will only evict you if they consider it as reasonable to do so. Make sure you go to your hearing, because VCAT can make a decision about your rental agreement even if you're not there. If you miss your hearing, you may be able to ask for a new hearing. You should do this as soon as possible. Dear Landlord can help you draft an application to VCAT. With a possession order, the rental provider can get a warrant, which allows only the police to remove you from the house and change the locks. Once the locks have been changed, your rental is over. However, you still have a right to pick up your belongings from the house. It can feel pretty stressful doing it alone, but legal services like ours at Justice Connect are here to help you every step of the way. By using Dear Landlord, you can understand your rights, take action, and stay in your home.
Thanks for making the video work, Rouge. It's always a gamble. So I just want to touch on a couple of really exciting parts, I guess, of the data that we're seeing through Dear Landlord and what it's telling us about the opportunities presented through digital tools such as Dear Landlord. So basically, we know, as I said earlier, we're seeing more and more renters facing eviction, but also the financial hardship that's come out of COVID particularly. And what we've seen that we're really excited about is the increased opportunities and the way that the Dear Landlord tool is being used more and more by the people that we want to. So the latest version of Dear Landlord, so that's our third iteration, which we launched in March 2021, has seen a 190% increase in users compared to the previous year. So that's really, in excess of 50,000 users that we've had in the last 12 months. That's huge for us when we think about the journey we went on with Dear Landlord from the first iteration, to see how we've been able to meet that need, but also work on our consumer outreach strategy. So we're making sure that we're getting out to the people who need to hear about it. We've also been able to see how our digital messaging, and Rouge will speak to this in a moment, really continues to expand our reach. So we've seen a really, 54% increase in social media post views since 2020. So we're really increasing the ways in which people can access the tool. But one of the key things I wanted to draw attention to is that I think with self-help tools, we often talk about early intervention in the legal space, and we often talk about the opportunities presented by digital tools. And it's been really exciting to see the way in which Dear Landlord has been able to demonstrate the opportunities there, because what we've seen is that actually for a huge majority, so 71% of Dear Landlord users, they have either not received a notice to vacate, which is the first step in the legal process, or they've not received a notice at all. So 36% of people had actually accessed Dear Landlord before they even received a notice to vacate. So they just fallen behind in rent and were really worried about being evicted. So it really demonstrates, I guess, that opportunity about using self-help to engage with people earlier before their legal problems exacerbate. It's really demonstrated the ability of a tool like Dear Landlord to do that. The second thing I just wanted to touch on in terms of some of the findings and outcomes has been about the opportunities around financial help. So we've seen that the average amount of arrears was around $2,500 for Dear Landlord users. And though that's quite a lot of money for people, and obviously means it puts them at risk of eviction, it is actually an amount of money where, with the right supports at the right time, people can be supported to stay in their homes. So it's the data like that we find so useful to analyse the way in which the tool is working, but also look at opportunities both for systems change, but also how we can better design services to meet those needs. But we are talking about consumer outreach. So what I wanted to just touch on now is how we know we're reaching the right people. So coming back to Rouge and the initial work we're doing around reaching people through consumer outreach, we basically needed to understand, who it was that we were trying to reach through Dear Landlord and how we could better provide support. So through a lot of our co-design and our one-on-one user feedback sessions, as well as our data through Frontline Services, we've seen some really key areas emerge that really influence a person's experience with Dear Landlord. And so by identifying those experiences, we were able to create archetypes that basically capture the key cohorts that most commonly use the tool. So you'll see there on screen, we really developed 4 key archetypes that we were designing for. So the new navigators, so this is new service users, particularly with COVID, that may not have engaged with the service system before, but are now. Upstream swimmers, so people that have always been doing it tough, but they know how to find their way around services, so they just need that extra support. Adopted anchors, so people who are new to Australia, migrated to Australia, and just need that support to understand processes because it's quite overwhelming. And finally, lighthouse keepers. So that's people who are not directly going to use the tool, but basically would recommend the tool to others and help other people find that. So really those archetypes helped us, divorce from kind of demographics, but really focus on mindsets as well as the sort of drivers of behavior, so that we could then use that both in improving the tool, but also in targeting our digital messaging and consumer outreach strategy. And I'll hand over to Rouge to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, so as Sam said, not only is it helping develop and improve the tool, but it was a huge improvement in contribution to the way that we navigated and developed our consumer outreach. So obviously, if you prepare a resource or a tool and you just kind of push it out there, you can't just, as I said, build it and expect people to come. You need to be really clear about who you're targeting and why you're targeting them. And the way that you do that is develop this kind of really clear knowledge about the mind frames and the behaviors of the certain people that would be in need of your tool. So we use those 4 archetypes to improve and inform our consumer outreach. So as you saw the beautiful video that we presented before, that's just one piece of content. And what we could have done and what was traditionally done was to prepare a beautiful piece of content and keep it on a YouTube channel or a website and then just keep it there. Instead, we used it as a core part of our integrated marketing campaign. So really using it for key moments, key developments, policy announcements, but also changed it depending on the different types of needs of the different cohorts. So when we saw an uptake in certain types of communities needing help, we shifted and changed the language, but we use the same tools to create that consistency, to ensure that the experience of using Dear Landlord was clear and our communication was clear. That kind of consistency, that clear communication builds trust with people and lets them know that this isn't just a tool that's going to really frustrate them or might, lead them down the wrong path, but instead give them an enhanced experience and really empower them to self-advocate. And so those 4 archetypes became kind of part of our language. And so every day, our team, the engagement team, reviews media policy updates, reviews all of those kind of developments in the legal sector as well as the broader community. And we identify different changes. And so if the Victorian government has announced a rent relief grant, we shifted the messaging to respond to that and invited people to use Dear Landlord. If there was a bit of a deadline on, applying for the rent relief grant, if there are issues or we're seeing a spike in people on temporary visas, including international students who needed help through, navigating rental evictions or preventing rental evictions, we changed the language to respond to that. And we optimized depending on the different channels that we used. And we understood who was using the different channels and how they were using it. And so really making sure that we're responding to the data rather than making assumptions. I think it's also really important, like we have expressed consistently throughout our afternoon sessions throughout this showcase, is that it's really ineffective to assume that demographic equals ability, and that actually you need to really test your assumptions on who's using digital tools and digital spaces and make sure that you're not making those assumptions, implicit biases inform the way that you're building tools or your online spaces. Feedback from people who've used Dear Landlord, as Sam said, that kind of like whopping huge increase of people using Dear Landlord. That's because not only are we seeing an increasing legal need and new cohorts of people requiring legal need for the first time ever, but also we're doing extensive outreach. And that means, Dear Landlord is an intervention that fulfills and is embedded embedded within our broader legal services. So we're using that extensive outreach to engage people, to invite them to resolve their legal problem, but also there are pathways throughout Dear Landlord to seek further help, whether it's financial counseling or engagement with our more intensive legal services through our homeless law program. And so this is some of the feedback that we got from users of Dear Landlord. We also run extensive surveying. So on a monthly and quarterly basis, after someone has downloaded their tailored and bespoke documents, we send them an email or a text message asking them to provide us insights into whether we were able to help them resolve their legal problem or prevent an eviction, or we were able to empower them to navigate, quite often a very terrifying experience and legal problems. So people said that the website was easy to use, and they were able to establish payment plans, and we were, instead of ignoring their problem and, as we've seen, like creating more comorbid legal issues, people were able to intervene earlier, which actually prevents homelessness. And so it's really working further upstream and doing that early intervention work. Sam will speak about the future focus about Dear Landlord here.
Thanks, Rouge. So yeah, it's exciting to think about the future now based on what we've achieved so far with Dear Landlord, and a few key things to draw attention to. One is about the needs of renters and how we have to be responsive to that. And certainly what we've seen through Dear Landlord is that financial hardship piece. So we really want to explore what that looks like more now that we're in a COVID normal stage, but also looking at family violence, because we've seen that the majority of users are women to Dear Landlord, and a lot of them have experienced family violence as one of the causes for the eviction. So we're really looking at how we might be able to better design our services to meet those needs. Secondly, we're also looking at basically where our pathways might integrate better. So because we do provide that self-help, but also pathways into more intensive support, really how we can make those pathways even more user-friendly. And then finally, a really exciting part of what we're doing at the moment is a longitudinal survey. So as Rouge mentioned, we are doing regular surveys of our users, but we're looking at a more longitudinal survey at the moment that we've just put out, our first one, looking at people 6 months down the track at least, or further down the track, to see that question of whether or not, they've been able to sustain their housing. What's the well-being of people after, 6 months or so after using a self-help tool like Dear Landlord. So for us, that's really something that's key, is understanding not only the impact in the short term after someone's used the tool, but in the longer term, how is this, working to create better outcomes for people really in that longer term. So we'll keep you posted on that as that develops.
Thank you so much, Sam. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got about 10 minutes or so for any key questions. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and give us an opportunity to answer any questions either in the chat or in the Q&A box. The first question that we got were we able to get a good number of users participating in the surveys? Initially, we have like mixed experiences of it, and we also tend to find better outcomes or better results when we're giving people an impetus or like a clear call to action. So the messages that worked the best was help improve the experiences of other renters in Victoria. People really engage with that kind of message, so contribute to improving this legal service. A lot of people, especially from marginalized communities, are very much invested in improving other people's experiences of the services that they come to interact with. So those call to actions worked really well. But also if we were giving out a we were putting people into a draw for a gift voucher. That often also improved engagement. Also, generally speaking, email open rates are declining, and we have seen a spike in engagement for our surveys using text message blasts. So as long as someone has provided their phone number and has agreed to receive surveys or feedback or provide feedback at a future date, we will send them a text message blast.
The other thing to say about surveys is very obvious, but you just have to be very careful about how many questions you're asking. So I think we do all get carried away, I think, in wanting all these, great feedback loops, but keeping it short and simple, we find that there's just much better ability of people to complete surveys. So that's an obvious one, but very true.
And also, obviously, I think that surveys can't be taken in isolation, because you don't want to take anecdata as gospel. You want to put it together with expert data, casework data, and also analytics data, and then create a kind of rich data set in which you make your decisions and understand, because sometimes the squeaky wheel may not be reflective of a broader experience. We've got another question from Sam from Info Exchange. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm curious whether you had any insights about embedding digital tools in non-digital support networks, especially for those who are digitally excluded and would be less likely to self-help online. I think for us, the key message, and as Kate very eloquently put it, is that you can't have a digital only response. These digital tools are about early intervention for people who can self-help, because previously those cohorts of people were not being supported and oftentimes are not eligible for more intensive legal services. So what we're trying to do is prevent those comorbid or compounding legal issues or more complex crisis point issues that community legal services are traditionally responding to, and trying to respond at an earlier stage. COVID-19 has created new cohorts of people that oftentimes are not very familiar with the legal service sector or navigating services, frontline services like ours. And so oftentimes we'll be searching for ways to find information or self-advocate or, navigate their kind of legal problems. So these tools are responding to those immediate experiences upstream before they become crisis points and before we build that, that cohort of people that are, requiring more intensive legal services. Dear Landlord is part of a whole, spectrum of legal services and intensities of services that we provide through either our in-house legal experts and lawyers and social workers doing a combined support or intervention, or through our pro bono network. But it's part of that kind of full gamut of services. So essentially, while the social worker or our frontline service worker can help someone go through Dear Landlord, and it can be very, very effective, especially because producing tailored documents can be very resource intensive, it isn't traditionally why this intervention was developed or created.
That being said, I do want to make a shout out to our engagement team about how smart they were about engaging with sort of those closed groups, and where there are people who are digitally literate, but others who are connected to those people who might not be on the group, who were then able to be, going back to our archetypes, those kind of lighthouse keepers that could then tell people about something or help them, kind of guide them to self-help tools. So even if someone wasn't in that digital world, they could still get access through those key people or through those kind of more closed communities. So yeah, getting access through those people, it was quite surprising how well that could work as well.
Yeah, the fourth archetype that we had there, the lighthouse, was a really incredibly engaged audience that we built. And oftentimes there's always a core node person in a community that is supporting or kind of providing information, or is kind of like a key trusted relationship sharer in a community. So understanding that, especially in communities of color or migrant communities, understanding that there are oftentimes those core people that may have more access or more understanding about our different services is really, really effective. And so using those people as a way to get to others is really important. And then we've got another question around, we have a set of inquiries where this sort of program would make a huge difference. So this is from Mitchell Harvey from SRS. At the moment, we have one very tired solicitor personally doing about 10 to 15 letters per week, per day to lenders. And Mitchell's question is essentially, how do you get a program funded and off the ground?
Great question. I mean, it's something that I think both government and philanthropy are looking at in terms of that scale, and the fact that there are all these ways in which we can use digital more effectively to help people and meet that need. So certainly we've been really lucky with Dear Landlord, speaking to that philanthropy was really able to go out on a limb for us and fund us through a number of iterations. So that would be, I think, a great starting point, because often philanthropy is willing to go there with the innovation piece, but I know it's also something that government is definitely looking at. So I think it's really about presenting something where you've got a real kind of design solution to a problem, and you've got some really clear steps about how you're going to go about it, noting that digital innovation, and we know this because we're doing it all the time, is, it takes a lot of work. So you have to have that ability, that expertise to follow through, and really making sure that you're costing it effectively as well, because often I think we go into it, as certainly we did when we initially started, with a fairly small budget, not realizing how much it would entail. So being realistic about budgets, but always happy to talk to people about our journey and provide support. So feel free to reach out direct as well.
I think what really did help, as head of engagement, I support Justice Connect through fundraising and grant making. But what really helped is that Dear Landlord was a reflection of our casework data, and it was an intervention that would improve or increase the capacity of our lawyers to do more integral work while creating efficiencies in really effective ways. So in the first iteration, so the latest iteration is the third of Dear Landlord, the first iteration was purely doing that, understanding that there was a feature like a tied solicitor doing several documents when there are people who are in much greater need, who are facing compounding issues, and our resources were stretched and also diminishing year by year. And so how do you create an intervention that is user-friendly and improves the experience of people facing legal problems, but also improves the efficiency? So there's kind of a multi-pronged outcome to developing that digital tool. I think we are out of questions. We've got 2 minutes to go. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us and for those really interesting questions. We're always here to have further discussion. If you'd like to be part of supporting our digital consumer outreach, learning from it, or learning from Dear Landlord, supporting Justice Connect Answers and our non-for-profit law resource library, please get in touch. Otherwise, we'll enjoy the next session on our marvelous award-winning pro bono portal. Thank you.